We've got anonymous. And anonymous, I got to tell you, anytime someone calls in as anonymous, I wonder why and if there's a motivation or if we're stepping into something, because you could have just lied and said your name was John. You could have given a nickname. We're not asking for identifying features that'll help people get to where you live. But I'm willing to give you the benefit of the doubt. Just know that I'm on guard because of the way you've identified yourself so far. I already feel like I'm arguing with a Twitter account. But go ahead, anonymous.
Yeah, it's all good. I get it. I guess kind of the reason that I didn't want to use my name is just that, like, I'm not, like, there's a lot of people watching and I'm not a super experienced speaker. And,
Okay.
I do get nervous talking in front of a lot of people.
Sure.
So,
I have a pseudonym.
yeah.
I go by Xander Crookshanks anytime I don't want to go by Jimmy Snow or my legal name.
I don't really have a name.
It's all good. It's all
anyway,
good.
Welcome. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm excited to talk.
I'm doing good. So what I called to talk about is like the resurrection of Jesus.
Okay.
So I guess I just get into it. My basic argument would be something along these lines. Like, premise one, Jesus was a real historical individual who died on a cross. Premise two, many of his followers thought they had seen him risen from the dead shortly afterward. And then premise three would be that, as far as I'm aware, group hallucination is impossible. And so the conclusion would be, if many people are thinking they saw him rise from the dead and group hallucination can't happen, then the best explanation we're left with is that they really did see him resurrected.
Okay. Outside of the Gospels, which is where the claim is, what evidence do you have that many followers saw him rise from the dead? And by the way, have you read Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds from the 19th century, along with the books that came after, which demonstrate that, first of all, group hallucination is possible and does occur. But outside of the Bible, what do we have that shows that there were followers who believed that they saw him rise from the dead?
Well, I guess my answer to the last question would be no, I have not read those particular works. But then outside of the Bible, what do we have that attests the resurrection? As far as I'm aware, we have very little, if anything. But I think using the New Testament,
we have nothing. And so what we have are a handful of copies of translations of copies of oral tradition stories that report about people who think that he rose from the dead. We have no empirical evidence for it. So you have nothing but unverifiable, anonymously authored anecdotal evidence. Why, for something as significant as an individual rising from the dead, why should that be considered enough evidence to say it happened?
Well, I think that having I guess a side point I would make is I would, of course, not concede that, the Gospels are anonymous and so
they
on.
are.
But
who wrote Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John?
Well, I think either Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John are one of their.
No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. No, sir. And no reasonable modern Christian scholar thinks this at all. As a matter of fact, if you here, let me open my Bible. Here's an NIV. Do you have some objection to the NIV?
I don't think so.
Okay, cool. So I'm going to open this NIV to the cover page for the book of Matthew, right here at the beginning of the Synoptic Gospels. A careful comparison of the four Gospels reveals that Matthew, Mark, and Luke are noticeably similar, while John is quite different. The first three Gospels agree extensive in language and the material they include, and the order and events. This goes through there. Normally there's a section here on the actual authorship, which might be, here we go. Literally, I'm going to hold this up to the screen. I don't know if you can see the screen.
I cannot.
At the beginning of the cover sheet for the book of Matthew, it says, although the gospel is anonymous, the early church fathers were unanimous in holding that, Ben's here, in holding that one of the 12 apostles was its author. So this Bible literally says that the book of Matthew is anonymous. It will say the same thing as long as it's covering the best scholarship for each of the other gospels. So you have books that aren't in fact written, or we don't know who they were written by. We have no reason to think that they were actually written by eyewitnesses. However, let's assume that all 4 gospels were written by eyewitnesses. Would that be enough to prove that somebody rose from the dead? Four people claiming to be eyewitnesses to someone rising from the dead. Is that enough?
Yeah. 4
It is?
eyewitnesses claiming that someone rose from the dead. I would say no, that's not necessarily enough evidence.
Oh, okay. You said yeah, and I was like, wow, I'm surprised that you think that's
that was
enough.
just
But
me like
Just an
I get
auditory
it.
that was
device.
just me like interpreting your question. So it's like, yeah,
Sure.
like
I got you. So now we have 4 accounts. We don't know who wrote them. We don't know if those people are eyewitnesses. Clearly, if 4 eyewitnesses aren't enough to confirm a resurrection, then 4 anonymous accounts that may not be by eyewitnesses cannot possibly be enough. So where's the additional evidence that warrants believing that the resurrection occurred? And while you're thinking about that, I am not a mythicist, but I have friends who are mythicists. They're people who believe that Jesus never existed. Those people, while I think they have adopted a burden of proof that they can't quite meet, do have one very, very good point, and that is nobody can actually demonstrate that Jesus did in fact exist. And so here you have a system where supposedly there's a God who, as a way to create a loophole for rules that he invented, supposedly comes down as part of his character, takes human form, sacrifices himself to serve as a loophole for rules that he's in charge of, is resurrected a day and a half later, even though they would like to say 3, and then determines to judge everyone based on whether or not they believe and accept this account, and the best evidence that they can point to cannot confirm his existence, cannot confirm any single unique fact about his life, and the resurrection, the single most important aspect of all of this, cannot be confirmed. What sort of idiot God sets up the crux of human salvation on such a flimsy, epistemologically unsound foundation? How dumb do you have to be to not provide better evidence for the most important fact in the entirety of human history if this story were true?
So I guess as you talk, it seems like we've sort of opened up 4 different paths that a conversation could go down. It seems like option A would be, are there eyewitnesses of the Gospels, right? Option B would be mythicism. Option C would be the theological points that you just raised. And then option D would be the historical question, even if I concede that the Gospels weren't written by eyewitnesses. Obviously, we couldn't talk about all of them. Do you have like a preference for like which one of those 4 points you raised you would rather me kind of
Pick
give
whichever
my
one you
thoughts
think
about?
you can most easily resolve, because to me, any one of them is absolutely damning to the notion. I mean, you called in because you think the resurrection is historical and historically reliable. So set aside whether or not it makes sense from a theological perspective. Set aside whether or not any of those things. You've already said that the only accounts that we have of the resurrection aren't sufficient to conclude that a resurrection occurred. So what else have you got? What is it that convinces you if those accounts aren't enough?
So I think that what makes the Gospels more convincing than just like a typical ancient source would be something that you've heard a million times from other Christians, but just the idea that like the Christians are persecuted and liars make poor martyrs. And so when you take this context and in tandem with the New Testament records we have, I think all of a sudden, okay, we do have a stronger case for the resurrection.
So what you're saying,
Right.
so what you're saying is that these anonymous, unverifiable accounts, which aren't sufficient to warrant a belief in the resurrection, are more believable because those same anonymous, unverifiable accounts lead to someone being martyred or claiming that they were martyred?
Excuse me, I have to go
Do
rejoin
you know how many
Mormonism.
people have died for their beliefs who aren't Christians?
Many.
Yeah. And so
But that-
why
I
does
think that-
why does someone why does someone who believes an anonymous, unverifiable account, that shows their willingness to die for their belief shows how strongly they believe it. But the truth is not impacted in any way by the number of people believe it or how strongly they believe it or their willingness to die for it. And so how can someone being martyred make the anonymous gospel more believable?
Yeah. So I think that I would agree with most of what you're saying. I wouldn't claim that, well, the gospel authors had, sorry, I wouldn't say that the gospel authors were like, oh, they're being threatened, so they're not going to lie. Rather, I think that the point where the threat of martyrdom is more relevant is in the characters that they're depicting. Because even if the Gospels are in general unreliable, when you have a number of different accounts all sort of kind of agreeing that there was a group of people claiming that something happened, that's pretty good evidence that at least there was a group of people claiming that something happened. So
No,
whatever you say
it's
about the
not.
Gospel,
Holy shit.
No, I specifically asked you whether or not these things make the anonymous gospels more believable. And then you said no. And then you talked yourself in a circle to coming back and saying yes. The answer is no.
right? I think I'm trying to distinguish between the characters in the Gospels versus the authors of the Gospels.
I think you're trying to appeal to a standard of evidence that isn't a good standard of evidence, my guy. Like everything you just described, if it happened on video, still wouldn't make the resurrection of Jesus Christ a historical event, because that's creating an ethereal thing that's never been shown to even be capable of happening. And if I can take you to Las Vegas this weekend and show you 10 different people who are really good at dying and resurrecting, your standard of evidence is far from this was on video. My goodness. I wish I had the name to say. I'm just going to call you Tom. Tom, my goodness.
What's really strange to me is that you just said that you weren't talking about the authors of the Gospels, but of the characters in them, except that, have you read the Gospels?
I have.
Okay. How many martyrs are listed in the Gospels?
As in how many people are martyred in the Gospels, or how many people in the Gospels
Correct.
end up being martyred?
Correct. Within the Gospels, how many people are martyred?
Only one.
Who?
Well, I guess I'm lumping in Acts with the Gospels, but Stephen.
Yeah, you are. And so here I am talking about the Gospels, which is the only place where there's any sort of resurrection, and all of them end right after that. And what happens is these accounts, which were spread around, managed to evidently convince some people who were then martyred. But that doesn't make the Gospels any more reliable. That is about whether or not they were convincing to people. And how convincing something is has no bearing on whether it's true. Was the 2020 election stolen from Donald Trump?
I don't think so.
I don't either. And yet thousands, if not tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, if not potentially millions of people believe that's the case because that's the story that got told. What you're basically arguing here is that the January 6th insurrectionists, their willingness to rush the Capitol and do violence lends credence to the claims that were made that the election was stolen. That is the exact same line of argument that you're using with the Gospels. What
Yeah, can I
evidence do you
clarify?
have? What evidence do you have specifically for a resurrection?
I think that what's relevant is that a witness that has motive to tell the truth isn't necessarily perfect, but a witness who has the means to tell the truth also
You
isn't
don't
perfect.
have any
When you
witnesses.
take both of them
You do not have. See, here's the thing. I just asked you what evidence you had for a resurrection, and you start talking about witnesses. Demonstrate that you can point to any witness at all.
well, even if I concede that the Gospels aren't eyewitness testimony, I can still point to Paul. I can still point to
Paul wasn't a witness.
a number of
Paul was not a
disciples.
witness. No, sir. No, sir. Paul was not a witness to any of this. Paul persecuted Christians by his own. Do you even know the Bible that you're talking about? A Damascus Road experience is not a witness of the resurrection.
Sure, I don't think any of them witnessed Jesus go from death to life. I think that they were rather seeing Jesus after his death now risen.
So,
And so I guess I would
so
say
you
that Paul
don't get
seen
to.
that.
So when I ask you what evidence do you have, and you immediately go to eyewitnesses, and then you can't provide a single statement from any eyewitness. Now I'll ask you again, what evidence do you have for the resurrection?
Well, we have a number of witnesses to eyewitnesses, right? So we have a number of different New Testament writings all depicting the same
You have a
individuals
bunch of
saying that
stories that claim there were eyewitnesses. That's hearsay upon hearsay. Point to a statement from a witness and how we can verify its accuracy.
I think that what you're doing is a little bit special pleading because
No, sir.
there
I
is
think
a
that
lot
what
of
you're doing is dishonest as fuck. If I told you that somebody stole a bicycle from down the street, but I couldn't produce any witnesses, I couldn't produce anything but a story, that wouldn't be enough. But suddenly, you're calling into a show to claim that there's good reason to believe there's a resurrection. And every single time I exercise an ounce of skepticism to ask you to demonstrate the truth of it, you duck and dodge and twist and turn. You are not being honest with yourself on this subject. And now you're trying to claim that I'm engaging in special pleading. Please define the special pleading fallacy and show where I've made it, or you will be done for today. You don't get to accuse me. You don't get to accuse me of arguing fallaciously when I've sat here patiently and pointed out that you have not fucking one leg to stand on. Demonstrate the special pleading fallacy that I just engaged with.
Yeah, so I think that the special pleading fallacy, as I saw it, was that if, of course, this is assuming that you accept, ancient historical facts more broadly, but the evidence for like 4 different, secondhand witnesses, like that is a lot stronger than the evidence for a lot of other ancient historical events. And so assuming
You,
that
sir, are dishonest,
know
and I
anything
want
at
you to listen very carefully. You just engaged in whataboutism, which I never even did. You just said the evidence from 4 secondhand witnesses is stronger than we have for other things. I don't give a fuck if your evidence for Jesus resurrecting is stronger than some other religion's bullshit claim. Where did I engage in special pleading, sir, or retract it?
okay, I will retract it if you agree that
No,
we can
no,
know
we're
very
not
little
playing.
with
You're
it.
going to retract
Fucking
it if I agree. How about you retract it, or you prove it, you retract it, or I fucking drop you from this call-in show.
Yeah, I think that the special pleading is if I assume that you grant things that are
Goodbye. Goodbye.
If I assume that I know you better than you know you, it's obvious special pleading.
If I assume that you said what I think you said, goodbye, you dishonest fuck.
Yeah, Anonymous.
I'm so sorry.
The one thing you did say at the beginning that was very honest, I do appreciate, and that's that you're new to it, and you sort of implied you're not very good at it. That all turned out to be very true.
I sat here patiently, leading you to this wonderful, cool well of water, and instead of drinking, you shit and puked in it.
Yeah. Yep.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jimmy Snow. I'm the executive producer of The Line. And at night, I sneak into Matt Dillahunty's house and I trade his cereals for other cereals. He comes out and he's like, wait, these are cereals I buy, but I swear I had different cereals. Anyway, would you like to support this channel or any specific show? You can do so over on Patreon or in channel memberships. There are special tiers for special shows or for the channel at large, and it helps us expand programming as well as hopefully very soon launch it in podcast form. Now, also, if you'd like to support, you can like, you can subscribe, you can leave a comment or a super thanks, which is a special highlighted comment that you pay for. Those are fun. And, screw the algorithm, go check out something over here, I suppose. Boy, I hope I can still put those icons there, because if I can't, this is going to look really stupid. I'm going to go buy some Cocoa Puffs and switch out Matt's mini wheats now.